Smoke and dust filled the air, turning the ruined city into a nightmare of shifting shadows and distant echoes. Captain Elias Carter pressed his back against a broken concrete wall, his rifle tight in his grip. The distant screech of Zaltharian war machines sent a chill down his spine. They were closing in. His squad was down to just 5 men, all battered, bleeding, and exhausted. Sergeant Bonner was the worst off. His armor was cracked, his side torn open by plasma fire. He coughed, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. "We're dead, aren't we?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Carter shook his head. "Not yet," he said, forcing confidence into his voice. "High Command knows we're here. The Revenant will come for us." Corporal Diaz checked his ammo. 3 rounds left. "I might as well throw my gun at them." Private Harlow let out a nervous laugh. "Better than nothing." The sky above was a deep, burning orange as the enemy's warships hovered in the distance, their massive cannons glowing with the promise of destruction. The Zaltharians weren't just here to kill. They wanted to erase. Their last defensive line was a crumbling government building, its once grand pillars now shattered into rubble. Carter's team had retreated inside, hoping for extraction. Instead, they got silence. "Come in, Revenant. This is Captain Carter, Xi-47 ground team," he said, pressing his radio. "We need immediate evac. Do you read?" The radio crackled, but no answer came. A sudden metallic howl echoed through the ruins. Every soldier froze. Then came the sound of heavy footsteps, crushing stone beneath them. Carter turned his head slowly, sweat dripping down his temple. Emerging from the dust was a towering Zaltharian hunter-class war beast. Its glowing red eyes scanned the ruins, its armored plating reflecting the firelight. Twin plasma cannons gleamed on its back, and its clawed arms flexed with terrifying precision. It let out another piercing screech, a signal. From the mist, hundreds of smaller Zaltharian drones skittered forward on spider-like limbs, their plasma rifles humming to life. Carter's grip tightened on his rifle. "Hold the line," he ordered, his voice calm despite the fear creeping into his chest. Bonner chuckled weakly. "Hell of a last stand." "Shut up and shoot," Diaz muttered. The Zaltharians charge. Carter fired first, his rifle barking as he took down one of the spider-like machines. His team followed, filling the air with blue plasma streaks and muzzle flashes. The drones screeched as they fell, but for every one they destroyed, 2 more took its place. Harlow lobbed a grenade into a cluster of them. Boom! Shrapnel tore through metal and circuitry, sending pieces of alien technology flying. But then the hunter-class war beast moved. With terrifying speed, it lunged, grabbing Diaz with its massive claws. "No!" Carter shouted. Diaz screamed as the beast lifted him into the air and crushed him like a toy. His body fell in 2 pieces, lifeless. Carter's heart pounded, but there was no time to mourn. "Fall back," he yelled, dragging Bonner toward the collapsed entrance of the building. Harlow and the others covered them, but the Zaltharians were relentless. A plasma bolt struck Harlow in the chest. He collapsed, gasping, his hands clawing at his burning wound. "Go," he coughed, but he was already fading. Carter clenched his jaw and pulled Bonner inside. Only 3 of them left. They barricaded the doors with whatever rubble they could, but the Zaltharians wouldn't be stopped by debris. Their claws scraped against the walls, their red eyes glowing in the dark as they searched for a way in. Bonner groaned, trying to sit up. "Elias, they're not coming, are they?" Carter stared at his radio. It was silent. He refused to believe it. No one gets abandoned. That was the code. That was the promise. His hand shook as he pressed the button again. "This is Captain Carter, Xi-47 ground team. We are still alive. We are still fighting." His voice broke with desperation. "Do you hear me? We are still here." For a moment, nothing but static. Then, a voice. "This is Admiral Volkov aboard the Revenant." A pause. Then, firm words that lit a fire in Carter's chest. "Hold on, Captain. We're coming." Admiral Sarah Volkov stood on the bridge of the Revenant, her sharp eyes locked on the holographic battlefield map. A crimson-red marker blinked over HFY, pulsing with urgency. Captain Elias Carter and his team were still alive, but they wouldn't be for long. "The Council has ordered a full retreat from HFY," her second-in-command, Commander Rains, said. His voice was tight, uneasy. "They've classified the planet as a lost cause. If we go back—" Volkov cut him off. "If we go back, we save our people." Her voice was ice. "No one gets abandoned." She turned toward the comms officer. "Patch me through to the fleet." The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, the Council." "I don't give a damn about the Council," she snapped. "Open the channel." A few seconds later, her voice boomed across the ships still stationed in the system. "This is Admiral Volkov. Captain Carter and his men are stranded on HFY. High Command may be willing to leave them behind, but I am not." She let that sink in for a moment. "I won't order anyone to follow me, but I need volunteers. We are their only hope." Silence. Then, "I'm in," came a voice from the comms. "Me too," another followed. One by one, captains and soldiers pledged themselves to the mission. Volkov turned to Rains. "Prep the fleet. We move now." The Revenant and a handful of rogue ships broke formation, their engines roaring as they turned back toward HFY. Volkov stared at the planet growing larger on the view screen. "Hold on, Carter," she whispered. "We're coming." Carter pressed his back against the crumbling wall of the ruined government building, his pulse pounding in his ears. Bonner was still alive, but barely. His breathing was ragged, and his hands were shaking from blood loss. Outside, the Saltharian forces were regrouping. The war beast that had slaughtered Diaz and Harlow stood motionless, as if waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Around it, the spider-like drones scuttled over the debris, scanning, searching for the last remnants of human life. Carter clenched his teeth. They couldn't hold out much longer. The radio crackled to life. "Carter, do you copy?" His breath caught in his throat. "Volkov, we're inbound, but you need to hold your position until we break through the blockade." Carter glanced at the wreckage around him. "We're out of time. The Saltharians are closing in." Volkov's voice was steady. "Then make them bleed for every inch." The signal cut, and Carter looked at the two soldiers left with him. Private Renner, the youngest, was shaking but trying to keep his rifle steady. Then there was Bonner, his face pale from blood loss, but his eyes still burning with defiance. "No one gets abandoned," Bonner muttered weakly. Carter nodded. "No one." Then he grabbed his rifle, took a deep breath, and charged out of cover. He fired in bursts, dropping 3 of the spider drones before they could react. Renner followed, his shots wild but effective, tearing through the enemy ranks. The war beast let out a piercing screech and finally moved. Carter barely had time to react before it lunged, its massive claws tearing through the wall behind him like paper. He ducked, rolling across the ground as the impact sent debris flying. Renner wasn't so lucky. The beast's tail lashed out, impaling him through the chest. He gasped, his body going limp as it flung him aside like garbage. Carter gritted his teeth. Another soldier gone. "Carter, get down." Bonner's voice was weak but urgent. Carter hit the ground just as Bonner, with the last of his strength, pulled the pin on a grenade and lobbed it at the war beast's face. The explosion rocked the ruins, sending the massive machine stumbling backward. But it wasn't enough to kill it. Carter scrambled to his feet, grabbed Bonner, and dragged him toward the center of the building. They needed a miracle. Above the planet, the Revenant and its fleet dropped out of FTL. Volkov barely had time to register the battlefield before the Saltharian blockade came alive. "Enemy ships are locking weapons," Rains shouted. Volkov gripped the edge of her command console. "Fire all batteries. Get us to the surface." The Revenant's railguns and plasma turrets unleashed hell, carving through the first line of Zaltharian ships. But the enemy was prepared. Dozens of Zaltharian warships descended on them like vultures, their sleek black hulls bristling with energy cannons. The rogue human fleet fought back, but they were outnumbered 10-1. A warning klaxon blared. "Admiral, the ironclad is taking heavy fire." Before the officer could finish, one of their ships exploded in a fireball, consumed by a Zaltharian torpedo barrage. Volkov's fists clenched. If they didn't reach Carter soon, he wouldn't have a team left to save. Carter and Bonner stumbled through the ruins, their breaths ragged. Then, they saw it, a strange metallic monolith in the center of the ruined structure, pulsing faintly with blue light. Bonner coughed. "What the hell is that?" Carter wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. It wasn't Zaltharian. He reached out, fingers brushing the surface. The second he did, a wave of energy pulsed outward, sending static through his radio. And then he heard a voice. Not from his radio. Inside his head. "Human, you should not be here." Carter's breath caught in his throat. "Who are you?" The voice was ancient, layered, mechanical yet organic. The last of the first ones. "And you are not meant to die here." The monolith's light flashed brighter, and suddenly, every Zaltharian machine outside froze. The war beast, the drones, all of them stopped moving. Carter's eyes widened. Bonner let out a weak laugh. "You gotta be kidding me." Then the monolith spoke again. "Run." Carter grabbed Bonner and did exactly that. As they ran, a new sound filled the air, the roaring engines of the Revenant. The sky split apart as human dropships descended, railguns blazing, unleashing firepower upon the frozen Zaltharian forces. And behind them, the war beast suddenly rebooted. Its red eyes blazed to life once more. Carter looked up at the sky as the rescue shuttles lowered. They weren't out of this yet. Carter's boots slammed against the rubble as he dragged Bonner toward the descending rescue shuttle. The sky was on fire. The Revenant and the human fleet were locked in brutal combat above, their weapons lighting up the darkness. Human dropships screamed down, railguns blazing, trying to punch a hole through the enemy lines. But the Zaltharian war machine was back online. The massive Hunter-class war beast let out a metallic screech, its red eyes burning as it turned its attention toward the escaping soldiers. Its plasma cannons charged, glowing with lethal energy. Carter's heart pounded. They wouldn't make it in time. A human gunship roared overhead, its side-mounted railguns unleashing hell on the war beast. The rounds slammed into its armor, sparks flying, but the monstrous machine barely staggered. It turned its cannons toward the gunship. Carter's stomach dropped. No. A blinding flash. The gunship exploded midair, a massive fireball consuming it in an instant. The debris rained down like falling stars. The war beast kept coming. The rescue shuttle was still 50 meters away, its ramp lowered, human soldiers firing to cover the escape. Plasma bolts whizzed past Carter's head, some slamming into the ground near his feet, kicking up dust and debris. Bonner groaned, his body too weak to keep moving. "Leave me, Carter." Carter tightened his grip and yanked him forward. "Shut up and keep moving." The war beast leaped. In one terrifying motion, it landed directly in their path, the ground shaking beneath its weight. Its shadow loomed over them, claws flexing, glowing cannons humming with deadly energy. Carter raised his rifle. It was useless, but he wouldn't die kneeling. The war beast's cannons locked onto him. Then, a railgun blast slammed into the machine's back, throwing it off balance. The Revenant had repositioned in low orbit, its side-mounted cannons now focused on the battlefield. Volkov's voice crackled in Carter's earpiece. "Run, damn it." Carter didn't hesitate. He hauled Bonner forward, sprinting with everything he had left. The shuttle was so close now. But the war beast wasn't done. With unnatural speed, it twisted its massive frame, its targeting systems locking onto the shuttle. Carter's eyes widened in horror. The war beast's cannons glowed, charging for a full power blast. Inside the shuttle, the human pilot realized it too late. No, 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 Carter muttered. A massive plasma beam erupted from the war beast's cannons. The rescue shuttle exploded. A wave of fire and shrapnel slammed into Carter and Bonner, sending them tumbling backward. The force of the blast ripped through the ruins, tearing apart the last remnants of the structure around them. Carter hit the ground hard, his vision blurring, his ears ringing. The world spun around him. When he managed to lift his head, his stomach twisted at the sight. The rescue shuttle, their last hope, was nothing but burning wreckage. Bonner coughed weakly beside him. That was our ride, huh? Carter stared at the wreckage, disbelief sinking in like ice in his veins. They were trapped. Above, on the Revenant, Volkov slammed her fist against the control panel. "Damn it," she cursed. "Get me another dropship down there. Now." Commander Rain's face was grim. "Admiral, the fleet is barely holding together. We've lost 4 ships already, and the blockade is closing in. We won't last much longer." Volkov's hands shook with frustration. She had made a promise. No one gets abandoned. And now Carter was trapped, cut off from extraction, surrounded by an entire army of Zalthirian war machines. "Ma'am," a tech officer called out, urgency in his tone. "New energy signature on the surface. It's the monolith." Volkov frowned. "What?" "The monolith. It's emitting a signal." "And Admiral," the officer swallowed hard, "the Exalthirians are reacting to it. Their fleet is shifting positions. It's like they're afraid." Volkov's eyes narrowed. "Get me Carter. Now." Carter was barely on his feet when his radio crackled. "Carter." Volkov's voice came through, tight and urgent. "I don't know what you did down there, but that monolith, it's affecting them." Carter wiped the blood from his lip. "Not me," he muttered, looking at the pulsing blue structure in the distance. The war beast was still standing, but it wasn't attacking. It was hesitating. The smaller Exalthirian drones, once relentless, began retreating. Some backed away slowly, while others flickered and shut down completely. The monolith pulsed again. A sound, deep, ancient, mechanical, filled the air. Carter heard the voice again. "You were warned, human. You should not be here." His blood ran cold. The monolith wasn't just some artifact. It was alive. Bonner coughed, spitting blood. What the hell is happening?" Carter had no answer. The war beast, still standing over them, suddenly jerked as if something had seized control of it. Its red eyes flickered. Then, it turned away. The massive machine, the same one that had slaughtered his men, started walking away. Carter and Bonner stared in shock. The Exalthirians were leaving. But why? Carter's heart pounded as he turned his gaze back to the monolith. Something far worse was about to happen, and he had no idea how to stop it. Carter gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay on his feet despite the searing pain in his side. Bonner was barely conscious, his body limp as Carter dragged him behind a pile of collapsed rubble. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, too quiet. The Exalthirians, once relentless in their assault, were pulling back, retreating from the monolith's presence. It didn't make sense. Carter tapped his earpiece. "Volkov, what the hell is happening? Why are they leaving?" Static crackled. Then Volkov's voice came through, tense and sharp. "We don't know. But whatever that monolith is, it's doing something to them. Their fleet is reorganizing. Some ships are leaving orbit entirely." Carter's stomach twisted. The Exalthirians never retreated without a reason. Something was wrong. Bonner coughed, his voice weak. "Carter, we have to go. We can't stay here." Carter's eyes flicked to the burning wreckage of their rescue shuttle. The realization hit hard. There was no extraction anymore. They were stranded. He clenched his fists. There has to be another way. A deep rumble vibrated through the ground beneath them. The monolith's glow pulsed brighter, its strange symbols shifting like living script. The air around it distorted, humming with power. Then, a new sound, a low, mechanical groan, so deep it rattled Carter's bones. He turned, his breath catching in his throat. Something was waking up. On the Revenant, Volkov stared at the tactical display in horror. "Admiral," the tech officer said, his voice shaking. "There's an unknown energy surge coming from the planet. Whatever it is, it's massive." The holographic map flickered. Then a new reading appeared. A structure buried deep beneath Zi-47's surface was activating. Rains looked pale. "Admiral, that's not just a monolith. It's a vault." Volkov's stomach twisted. A vault. Then she saw the readings, power levels rising exponentially. "Get me Carter. Now." Carter barely had time to react before the ground beneath the monolith split apart. A massive chasm opened, dust and debris cascading into the abyss. From its depths, a structure, titanic in scale, began to rise. Ancient, metallic, pulsing with an eerie blue light. The sheer magnitude of it sent a chill through Carter's spine. Bonner's voice was hoarse. "What the hell is that?" Carter didn't have an answer. Then the voice returned, not just in his head this time, but echoing through the battlefield like a thunderous storm. "You have awakened what was meant to sleep." The monolith's pulsing intensified. The ground trembled violently. Then Carter saw it, something moving beneath the rising structure. For a moment, he thought they were just shadows, but then the shapes detached from the darkness. Massive, towering figures of obsidian metal, their bodies covered in intricate patterns of glowing symbols. Their eyes burned with the same eerie light as the monolith. The first ones. Not dead, not forgotten. They had been sleeping. And now, they were awake. On the Revenant, alarms blared across the bridge. "Admiral, multiple unknown contacts on the surface," the tactical officer shouted. Volkov's eyes narrowed as she stared at the readings. These weren't Zaltharians. This was something else entirely. Then a new alert flashed across the screen. "Ma'am, the Zaltharian fleet is leaving, but not retreating." Volkov's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "They're fleeing." A chill ran down her spine. The Zaltharians, who had fought humanity ruthlessly, who had refused surrender at every turn, who had thrown entire fleets into battle just to crush a single human ship. They were running, and whatever was rising from the surface, it was why. Carter backed away slowly as the towering figures stepped forward, their movements unnervingly smoothed, too precise. They looked down at him, their glowing eyes scanning, analyzing. Then, one of them raised a hand. Carter's body locked up, paralyzed. His breath caught in his throat as an invisible force gripped him, lifting him off the ground. Bonner shouted, trying to raise his rifle, but a simple gesture from the entity sent him flying backward, slamming into a wall. The deep, layered voice echoed through Carter's skull. "You are unworthy." His head pounded, his vision blurred. Then, pain. A searing, burning pain in his mind, like his skull was being torn apart from the inside. Flashes of images, memories not his own. Worlds burning, stars collapsing, an empire that once ruled the galaxy. The first ones. Conquerors. Tyrants. Gods. And then, something that had destroyed them. Carter gasped as the entity tightened its grip on his mind. "We will not fall again." A surge of power erupted from the being. Carter screamed. On the Revenant, Volkov watched as the energy readings on the surface spiked beyond anything recorded. "Admiral, we have to get out of here," Rain shouted. But Volkov shook her head. "We're not leaving Carter behind." She took a breath, her hands clenched into fists. Then she made her choice. All ships, focus fire on the monolith. The bridge went silent. Rains turned to her in shock. That could kill everyone down there. Volkov's voice was firm. If we don't stop whatever's waking up, it won't just kill Carter. It will kill all of us. She hesitated for only a moment. Then she gave the order. Fire. Carter barely registered the sound of orbit-to-surface railgun strikes as they rained down. The first ones looked up just as the first impact hit the monolith. A massive explosion erupted, shockwaves tearing through the ruins. Carter felt the grip on his mind shatter. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air. His body burned, his head pounding. The first ones reeled from the attack, their glowing eyes flickering, but they didn't fall. Carter forced himself to move. He crawled toward Bonner, who was barely breathing. The sky above split open as more human ships fired their weapons. The ground cracked beneath the monolith. The entire battlefield was collapsing. Carter grabbed Bonner's arm. "Come on, we have to move." Bonner coughed, shaking his head. He was too weak. "Carter, you have to go." Carter clenched his teeth. Not happening. Bonner smiled faintly. No one gets abandoned, right? Then, with the last of his strength, he shoved Carter toward the edge of the ruins. Carter stumbled, falling backward. Just as the monolith detonated, the shockwave engulfed everything. Darkness, cold, silence. Carter's body felt weightless, drifting in the abyss of unconsciousness. His mind flickered between memories and the present. Bonner's last words, the explosion, the monolith shattering. Then suddenly, pain jolted through him like a lightning bolt. He gasped awake, sucking in air like a drowning man. The ringing in his ears slowly faded, replaced by the distant roar of battle. His limbs ached, his head pounded, but he was alive. His visor flickered back online, flashing red warnings. Oxygen low. Suit integrity compromised. Location unknown. Carter groaned, pushing himself up. He was lying amidst the ruins, half buried under debris. The battlefield around him was unrecognizable. Fire, smoke, and shifting rubble stretched in every direction. The monolith was gone, completely obliterated. But the first ones, they were still standing. Their towering figures moved through the destruction, their glowing eyes scanning the wreckage. Despite the orbital bombardment, they remained, damaged but not defeated. Carter's heart pounded. If they survived that, what the hell would it take to stop them? A voice crackled in his ear. "Carter, come in. Carter, do you copy?" It was Volkov. He tapped his earpiece, coughing. "Still here." Relief flooded her voice. "Thank God. We thought you were dead." "Not yet," he muttered. "But we've got a problem. Those things are still moving." "We see them," Volkov said. "Our bombardment barely slowed them down. But we might have one last shot." Carter forced himself to stand, gripping his rifle for support. "I'm listening." Volkov took a deep breath. "There's a power core beneath the monolith's ruins. Our scans show it's still active. If we can overload it, we might trigger a chain reaction big enough to wipe them out." Carter exhaled sharply. "What's the catch?" "You'll have to activate it manually. And Carter, once you do, you'll only have 3 minutes to get clear." He let out a dry chuckle. "Figures." Carter moved fast, pushing through the debris. His muscles screamed in protest, but he ignored the pain. He had no choice. Ahead, the first ones were recovering. Their bodies were cracked and sparking. But they were adapting, learning. The next attack wouldn't be enough. He reached the wreckage of the monolith, his HUD scanning for the power core. There. It was deep inside a collapsed structure, glowing faintly beneath layers of shattered metal and stone. Carter climbed down, prying away the debris until he reached the exposed console. The ancient controls pulsed with energy, the strange alien symbols shifting before his eyes. His earpiece crackled. "Carter, status." "I'm at the core. Starting override." Volkov's voice was tense. "Be ready to move. The second it hits critical, you run." Carter didn't answer. He was already working. His fingers flew across the controls, bypassing security locks, forcing the system into overload. The core hummed louder, its glow intensifying. Suddenly, a shadow fell over him. Carter turned. One of the first ones was right behind him. It reached for him, its hand crackling with energy. Carter dove aside as a bolt of pure energy obliterated the console. Sparks flew, the core flickering erratically. Damn it! He rolled onto his feet, raising his rifle. He fired, but the bullets barely scratched its armor. The first one moved fast. Too fast. It slammed a hand against his chest, sending him flying into the rubble. Pain erupted through his body. His vision blurred. He tried to stand, but the entity was already on him. The voice echoed in his mind again. "You are weak." It reached for him, its burning eyes locking onto his. Carter's body froze. His limbs refused to move, his breath caught in his throat. It was inside his mind again. Then, a sniper round punched through the creature's head. The force sent it staggering back. Carter gasped as the mental hold shattered. His body collapsed onto the ground. A voice rang in his earpiece. "Get up, Carter." He recognized it instantly. Rains. He looked up to see her perched on a distant ledge, rifle smoking. Carter didn't hesitate. He lunged for the console, smashing the final override. The core screamed to life. On the Revenant, alarms blared. "Admiral, the core is overloading." Volkov clenched her fists. "How long?" 2 minutes before detonation. Volkov's jaw tightened. "Carter needs an evac. Now." A pilot's voice came through. "Ma'am, the Saltharian fleet is still in the area. If we send a shuttle, then we'll clear them out." Volkov turned to her officers. "All ships, fire at will." Carter ran, every muscle screaming in protest. The ruins collapsed around him, the ground shaking violently. Rains sprinted beside him, covering his flank. "Keep moving." Behind them, the first ones were not retreating. They were angry. Their bodies crackled with energy, their movements becoming faster. One of them lunged. Rains spun, firing 3 perfect shots, one in the chest, one in the leg, and one in the head. The creature stumbled, but didn't fall. Carter saw his chance. He grabbed a fallen Zaltharian energy spear, twisted, and drove it straight into the creature's glowing core. The first one screamed. Then, its body collapsed into a pile of burning fragments. Rains raised an eyebrow. "Not bad." Carter smirked. "Let's get the hell out of here." Above them, the sky erupted with fire. The human fleet had engaged the Taltharians, blasting apart their blockade. In the chaos, a single dropship broke through the clouds, racing toward them. Volkov's voice rang in Carter's ear. "Move. You have 30 seconds." The dropship descended fast. Carter and Rains sprinted toward it as the core's glow reached critical mass. The ramp opened. They leaped. The instant they hit the floor, the pilot pulled up hard. Carter turned just in time to see the ground erupt into a blinding explosion. A shockwave tore through the battlefield, consuming everything. The first ones, the ruins, the entire Exaltharian war camp, all gone. Silence. Then, cheers erupted through the comms. Volkov's voice came through, breathless. "Carter, you did it." He let out a shaky laugh. "Damn right I did." Rains chuckled beside him. "You look like hell." Carter smirked. "Feel like it too." As the dropship soared toward the Revenant, Carter let himself finally breathe. The battle was over. But deep inside, he knew this war was far from finished. The silence after the battle was deafening. No gunfire, no explosions, no enemy voices whispering in the darkness. Just the low hum of the dropship's engines and the ragged breathing of the survivors. Carter sat slumped against the cold metal wall of the cabin, his body bruised, his mind reeling. He stared at his hands, shaking, covered in dirt and dried blood. The weight of everything that had happened pressed down on him like an anchor. They had won. The enemy was gone. But at what cost? Across from him, Rains was tending to a wound on her arm, her face set in an unreadable expression. She had saved his life. Again. "You all right?" she asked, her voice rough but steady. Carter exhaled slowly. "I don't know." The ship jolted slightly as it entered the Revenant's hangar. The moment the ramp lowered, medics rushed in, carrying the wounded out on stretchers. Carter refused one, pushing himself up despite the sharp pain in his ribs. Volkov was waiting for them. Her usually sharp, commanding presence was softened by exhaustion and something else. Relief. "You made it," she said simply. Carter managed a tired smirk. Wouldn't want to miss the celebration. But there was no celebration. The crew was silent, moving with heavy steps. The cost of victory hung over them like a storm cloud. Carter's eyes flicked to the line of covered bodies being carried past them. Bonner was among them. His stomach twisted. Bonner, who had fought to the last second. Bonner, who had been his friend. Gone. He clenched his fists. It wasn't fair. Volkov must have seen the look on his face. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm but understanding. "We'll honor them. Every single one of them." Carter nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Damn right we will." The next hours were a blur. The debriefing was cold, clinical. They went over what had happened, what had worked, what had gone wrong. The first ones were destroyed. The Exaltharian base was obliterated. The human fleet had suffered heavy losses, but they had survived. It should have felt like a victory. But all Carter could think about was who wasn't here to see it. After the meeting, he found himself in the Memorial Bay, a quiet place, dimly lit, where the names of the fallen were displayed on a holographic wall. He reached out, tracing his fingers over Bonner's name. "You'd probably say something stupid right now," Carter muttered. Something about how this was all worth it. His throat tightened. He hadn't even gotten to say goodbye. "You were right, though," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Humanity doesn't go down easy, and we sure as hell don't leave anyone behind." He took a shaky breath, stepping back. He couldn't stay here. Not yet. Outside, the ship was alive with movement. Repairs were already underway. The war wasn't over. This was just one battle in a much larger fight. Carter found Rains near the armory, checking her gear like nothing had happened. "You ever stop?" he asked. She smirked. "Not my style." A beat of silence stretched between them. Then she sighed, glancing at him. "You think this is really over?" Carter looked out the window, where the remains of the battlefield still glowed faintly in the void. "No," he admitted, "but it's a damn good start." Rains nodded. "Then let's make sure we finish it." Carter let out a breath, nodding back. The first ones had thought humanity was weak. They had fought wrong.